Let me go. Let me go. The words tore from 7-year-old Emma Hayes's throat as rough hands dragged her toward the idling motorbike. Her school backpack hit the pavement with a violent thud, spilling crayons and homework across the cracked asphalt of Maple Street's forgotten alley. A stick of purple crayon rolled toward a storm drain, the same one she'd used that morning to draw a picture of her and Courage playing in their tiny backyard. The man's grip tightened around her waist like a vice, his calloused fingers digging into her ribs through her thin cotton dress. The yellow one with tiny sunflowers that her grandmother had sewn by hand because they couldn't afford store-bought clothes. His breath reeked of cigarettes and something sour that made her stomach lurch and reminded her of the smell that lingered around the abandoned houses where the older kids said bad things happened. "Shut up, kid. This'll be over quick if you cooperate." His voice carried the kind of casual menace that suggested he'd done this before many times. Emma's mind screamed for her grandmother, for Mrs. Peterson who ran the corner store, for anyone who might hear her cries echoing off the brick walls. But the narrow alley between Murphy's Hardware and the old laundromat, the same path she'd walked every day after school for 3 years, had become a trap that swallowed her voice. Her small fists hammered against the stranger's leather jacket, but her 7-year-old strength was nothing against his adult frame. He was already lifting her onto the bike, and she could feel the heat from the engine through her school shoes. The metal seat burned against her legs, and terror filled every cell in her body. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. Just an hour ago, she'd been sitting in Mrs. Franklin's classroom, carefully coloring a worksheet about different types of clouds, thinking about nothing more dangerous than whether she'd remembered to put fresh water in Courage's bowl before leaving for school. That's when she saw him. 50 yards away, a small brown and white puppy had frozen mid-step on the sidewalk. Every muscle in his compact body had gone rigid. His ears perked forward in that way she'd learned meant he was processing something important. The same puppy she'd rescued from this very street corner 3 weeks ago, soaked, shivering, and so covered in mud that she'd almost mistaken him for a pile of rags. The one she'd named Courage because despite being terrified and alone, he'd still wagged his tail when she'd knelt down and extended her hand. Now those dark chocolate eyes that had learned to trust her completely over the past 21 days, locked onto hers with an intelligence that made her heart skip. She could see the exact moment when Courage understood that something was terribly wrong. His body language shifted from curious to alert to something that looked almost like rage, though she'd never seen anger in him before. The engine roared to life beneath her, vibrating through her small frame. "Please," she whispered, no longer fighting against the man's iron grip. Her voice carried a desperate prayer meant for the universe, for God, for her mother who she'd never met but somehow felt watching over her. But somehow she knew the scruffy little dog understood every word, understood the love and hope and absolute faith she was pouring into that single syllable. "Please find me." The motorbike lurched forward with a grinding of gears, and Emma watched Courage take his first running step in their direction. His small legs pumped with determination that would have made her laugh with joy under any other circumstances. She'd seen him chase squirrels and butterflies in their postage stamp backyard, but this was different. This was purpose, pure and desperate. Then the alley walls blurred past in a kaleidoscope of brick and shadow, and her puppy disappeared from view. But inside her chest, something told her this wasn't goodbye. Something told her that the bond they'd forged over shared loneliness and gentle kindness was stronger than distance, stronger than fear, stronger than whatever evil had snatched her from everything safe and familiar. "Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you're watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description. For hours earlier, Emma had been sitting cross-legged on her grandmother's kitchen floor, carefully brushing Courage's coat with an old hairbrush that had once belonged to her mother. The bristles were worn smooth from decades of use, but they still worked perfectly for removing the tangles from Courage's increasingly lustrous fur. The puppy sat perfectly still, his tail wagging in gentle rhythm against the worn linoleum that Rose had scrubbed clean every morning for the past 40 years. "You're such a good boy," Emma had whispered, the same words she'd spoken every morning since bringing him home. Her small fingers worked methodically through his coat, finding and removing the occasional burr or bit of debris from his adventures in their tiny backyard. "Grandma Rose says you're getting stronger every day. She says you've gained at least 3 pounds since we found you." The morning sunlight streaming through their kitchen window caught the golden highlights in Courage's brown fur, making him look almost magical. Emma had convinced herself that he understood every word she spoke to him, and the way he tilted his head when she talked seemed to confirm it. From her chair at the kitchen table, Rose Hayes had watched her granddaughter with eyes that held decades of worry and wonder in equal measure. At 68, Rose carried the weight of raising a child again after losing her own daughter, Emma's mother, Sarah, to complications during childbirth 7 years ago. The doctors had said it was a rare condition, something that couldn't have been predicted or prevented, but Rose still carried the guilt like a stone in her chest. They lived on her modest monthly pension check in a neighborhood where sirens sang lullabies and safety was never guaranteed. Their little house, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen barely large enough for their second-hand table, sat on a street where half the streetlights had burned out and stayed that way because the city had more pressing concerns than Maple Street's residents. But watching Emma with that puppy had stirred something in Rose's chest she hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe. Or the belief that sometimes the most broken things could heal each other. She'd seen how Emma's nightmares had decreased since bringing Courage home. How the child who rarely smiled had begun laughing again when the puppy chased his own tail or tried to catch soap bubbles in the backyard. "Emma, honey, you need to get ready for school soon," Rose had called softly, glancing at the ancient clock above their refrigerator. The same refrigerator that hummed too loudly and had to be jiggled just right to keep the door sealed, but it kept their food cold, and that was enough. Emma had pressed her forehead against Courage's head, sharing a secret only they understood. The puppy's fur was warm and smelled faintly of the lavender soap they'd used to bathe him when he'd first arrived, trembling and covered in what looked like motor oil from the garage where he'd apparently been hiding. "I'll be back after school," she'd promised him, her voice carrying the absolute certainty that only children possess. "And then we'll play fetch in the backyard until dark. Maybe Grandma Rose will let us stay outside long enough to see the first stars come out." The puppy had licked her nose once, his small pink tongue warm and slightly rough against her skin, as if sealing their pact. His dark eyes had held that same intelligence she'd noticed from the very beginning, as if he understood not just her words, but the love behind them. Neither of them knew it would be the last promise Emma would make from the safety of home. Rose had packed Emma's lunch with the same care she'd shown every school day for 3 years. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich cut diagonally because Emma preferred it that way, an apple she'd polished until it gleamed, and a small carton of milk they'd bought with the few extra dollars left over from grocery shopping. She'd kissed Emma's forehead and reminded her to walk straight home, to stay away from the construction site on 3rd Street, and to remember that she was loved beyond measure. It was the same routine they'd followed every day since Emma started school, a ritual that made their uncertain world feel stable and safe. Now, as the motorbike carved through side streets Emma didn't recognize, her mind clung to that memory like a lifeline. The morning felt like it had happened in another lifetime, to another little girl who lived in a world where the worst thing that could happen was forgetting her homework or scraping her knee on the playground. The man driving hadn't spoken since leaving the alley, but she could feel the tension radiating from his shoulders like heat from a fever. Every few seconds, he glanced in the side mirror with the paranoid intensity of someone being hunted, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles working beneath his stubbled skin. His leather jacket smelled like old cigarettes and something chemical that burned her nostrils. Emma tried to memorize the route. Left on Riverside where Mrs. Chen's flower shop sat dark and closed. Right past the old Baptist church with the broken steeple that had been damaged in a storm 2 winters ago. Straight through what looked like an industrial district filled with abandoned warehouses and empty lots where weeds grew through cracks in the concrete. But fear had a way of scrambling details, and soon everything blurred into a nightmare of gray buildings and broken windows that watched their passage like dead eyes. The landscape grew more desolate with each passing mile. They passed rusted chain-link fences and loading docks where no trucks had pulled up in years. Graffiti covered most of the visible surfaces, some of it artistic, some of it threatening, all of it speaking to the kind of forgotten places where people disappeared and no one came looking. They were heading toward the old Riverside textile factory on the outskirts of town, the massive complex that had been closed for 5 years after the company moved production overseas. Emma had heard older kids at school dare each other to explore the empty buildings, spinning stories about homeless people living in the abandoned offices and drug dealers using the warehouses for meetings. But she'd never imagined she'd see them under these circumstances, as a prisoner rather than an adventurer. The bike slowed as they approached a gap in the perimeter fence where someone had cut the chain link and peeled it back like the lid of a can. Beyond the fence, the factory complex spread out like a concrete graveyard. Multiple buildings connected by covered walkways, loading docks that gaped empty and dark, and parking lots where weeds had broken through the asphalt in irregular patterns. "End of the line, sweetheart," the man said, his voice carrying a coldness that made Emma's skin crawl. There was something almost businesslike in his tone, as if he was simply completing a routine task. As he cut the engine, Emma heard something that made her heart nearly explode with hope. In the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of barking. Not just one bark, but several different voices calling out in urgent harmony, a canine alarm system that seemed to be growing closer by the second. The man heard it too. His head snapped up, scanning the tree line beyond the factory grounds with the sharp attention of a predator suddenly realizing he might have become the prey. "What the hell?" He muttered the words under his breath, but Emma caught them. She could hear genuine concern in his voice, the first crack in his confidence since he'd grabbed her. Emma's lips curved into the tiniest smile she'd managed since this nightmare began. Because she knew that bark. She'd heard it every morning for 3 weeks when Courage got excited about breakfast, every afternoon when she came home from school, every evening when they played in the backyard until Rose called them in for dinner. She'd learned to read its every tone and meaning, from the sharp yip that meant "pay attention to me," to the deeper woof that meant "stranger approaching." This was different from any sound she'd ever heard him make. This was desperate, determined, and somehow organized. Courage had found her. But as the man dragged her off the bike and toward the factory's rusted entrance, Emma realized something that chilled her more than his rough hands or threatening words. The barking wasn't just Courage anymore. It was growing louder, multiplying, spreading like an alarm through the abandoned landscape. She could distinguish at least 4 different voices, maybe more, all of them calling out with the same urgent intensity. Her puppy hadn't come alone. And somehow, that terrified her kidnapper more than it comforted her. "Stupid mutts," the man growled, but his movements had become hurried, almost frantic. "Come on, kid. Time to meet your new accommodations." The factory door slammed shut behind them with a finality that echoed through the empty corridors like a gunshot. The sound reverberated off concrete walls and high ceilings, bouncing back and forth until it faded into the kind of silence that felt heavy and waiting. But outside, the barking continued, growing closer and more insistent with each passing second. Emma could hear it even through the thick walls, a symphony of loyalty and determination that made her chest tight with hope and terror in equal measure. Emma Hayes was about to discover that sometimes salvation comes on 4 legs, and that the act of kindness she'd shown a frightened puppy 3 weeks ago was about to save her life in ways she never could have imagined. The real question was whether she'd live long enough to see it happen. Inside the abandoned factory, as her captor dragged her deeper into the maze of empty rooms and shadowed hallways, Emma held on to one thought with the fierce determination of a drowning person clinging to driftwood. Courage was out there, and he wasn't giving up. Neither would she. 3 miles away, Rose Hayes was standing at her kitchen window, watching the same spot on Maple Street where Emma should have appeared 15 minutes ago. The ancient clock above the refrigerator ticked with metronomic persistence, each second stretching longer than the last. Rose's arthritic fingers gripped the edge of the sink so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Emma was never late. Not once in 3 years of walking the same route home from school. At her feet, Courage paced in tight circles, his small body radiating an anxiety that seemed to match her own. The puppy had been restless since noon, whining at the door and scratching at the floorboards with an urgency Rose had never seen in him before. Now he was making a low, continuous sound in his throat. Not quite a whimper, not quite a growl, but something that made the hair on Rose's arms stand up. "She's probably just staying after school to help Mrs. Franklin," Rose murmured, but the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Emma had never stayed after school without asking permission first. The child had learned early that in their neighborhood, routine was safety, and safety was survival. Courage's pacing intensified. He ran to the front door, stood on his hind legs to scratch at the wood, then returned to Rose's side, his dark eyes pleading with an intelligence that still amazed her. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd watched this puppy transform from a terrified, half-starved creature into Emma's constant companion and protector. But this was different. This was urgency bordering on panic. "You know something, don't you, little one?" Rose knelt down slowly, her joints protesting the movement. Courage immediately pressed against her, his small body trembling with barely contained energy. You know something's wrong. Back at the textile factory, Emma found herself in what had once been the main production floor. A cavernous space filled with the skeletal remains of industrial machinery. Massive metal frames stood like monuments to abandoned prosperity, their conveyor belts long since removed, leaving only rust-stained concrete and the ghost of what this place had been. Her captor, she'd heard him answer his phone with the name Rick, was speaking in low, urgent tones to someone on the other end of the line. Emma caught fragments of the conversation. Got the package. Yeah, just like the photo. No complications yet, but... The phone call confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't random. Someone had specifically wanted her, specifically sent Rick to find her. But why? Her grandmother barely had enough money for groceries. They owned nothing valuable except their love for each other, and a 7-week-old puppy who'd already proven he was worth more than gold. Listen, kid, Rick said after ending the call, his voice taking on a falsely friendly tone that made Emma's skin crawl. You're going to be here for a while, so you might as well get comfortable. Your old lady will get a call soon about what it's going to take to get you back. Emma's heart sank. Grandma Rose didn't have money for ransom. They shopped with coupons and bought day-old bread from the discount rack. The only reason they'd been able to afford dog food for Courage was because Mrs. Chun at the flower shop had given Rose extra hours helping with inventory. But something else in Rick's tone bothered her. The way he'd said a while, and what it's going to take suggested this wasn't just about money. There was something else happening here, something that made her 7-year-old instincts scream warnings she didn't fully understand. Outside, the barking had grown into a full canine symphony. Emma could distinguish Courage's voice from the others now. Higher-pitched, more frantic, but somehow orchestrating the chaos. It was as if he was communicating with the other dogs, organizing them for something. Rick heard it too, and his casual demeanor was cracking. He kept glancing toward the windows, and Emma noticed a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool air inside the abandoned building. Stupid mutts, he muttered again, but there was less conviction in his voice this time. 6 blocks away, Mrs. Chun was locking up her flower shop when she saw Courage racing down 3rd Street at a speed that defied his small legs. The puppy moved with single-minded determination, pausing only to bark once at her before continuing his frantic journey. Behind him, following at a distance that suggested coordination rather than coincidence, came a pack of the neighborhood's street dogs. Mrs. Chun recognized most of them. The old German Shepherd mix who lived behind the auto repair shop, the 3-legged beagle who'd been hit by a car last winter, but survived, the massive Rottweiler everyone assumed was dangerous until they realized he was actually gentle as a lamb. These weren't dogs running together by chance. They were following Courage, responding to some call for help that humans couldn't hear, but they understood perfectly. Mrs. Chun had lived in this neighborhood for 43 years. She'd seen enough to know when something was seriously wrong. She pulled out her phone and dialed the police. I need to report a missing child, she said the moment the dispatcher answered. Emma Hayes, 7 years old. Something's happened to her. Back in the factory, Emma was learning that Rick wasn't working alone. 2 more men had arrived while she'd been lost in thought. One older with graying hair and cold eyes, another younger, but with the same predatory energy that made her want to disappear into the shadows. You did good, Rick, the older man said, and Emma noticed he spoke with an accent she couldn't place. This one's exactly what the client ordered. Young, innocent, won't be missed for long. The casual way he spoke about her, as if she was merchandise rather than a human being, made Emma's blood run cold. But it was his next words that truly terrified her. The flight leaves at midnight. We'll have her processed and ready for transport by then. Transport. Processing. Flight. Even at 7 years old, Emma understood enough to know they weren't talking about returning her to Grandma Rose. They were talking about taking her somewhere far away, somewhere she might never be found. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. She'd allowed herself to hope that this was just about money, that Rick would make his phone call, and eventually let her go home. But these men were talking about her like she was cargo to be shipped, a commodity in some transaction she couldn't comprehend. Outside, Courage's barking had taken on a new quality, sharper, more commanding. The other dogs were responding in what sounded like agreement, their voices blending into something that was less random noise and more organized communication. The older man noticed too. What's with all the racket out there? Rick's nervousness was becoming impossible to hide. Just some strays. They've been making noise since we got here. Well, shut them up. The last thing we need is attention. As Rick headed toward the door, Emma made a decision that surprised even her. She'd spent her whole life being the good girl, the obedient child who followed rules and never caused trouble. But sitting in this abandoned factory, listening to men discuss her future like she was a package to be shipped, something inside her shifted. If Courage could be brave enough to track her across the city and rally an army of street dogs, she could be brave enough to give him something to work with. When Rick's hand touched the door handle, Emma took the deepest breath of her life and screamed. Not a scream of fear or pain, but a scream of pure defiance that echoed off the concrete walls and carried through every broken window in the building. A scream that said she was Emma Hayes, granddaughter of Rose Hayes, friend to a puppy named Courage, and she was not going quietly into whatever darkness these men had planned for her. The scream also served another purpose. Outside, Courage's barking immediately shifted in response, becoming more urgent, more directional. He'd heard her voice, and now he knew exactly where she was. The real rescue was about to begin. But inside the factory, Emma had just learned that some betrayals cut deeper than others. Because as her scream faded and Rick spun around with rage in his eyes, the older man smiled, a cold, calculating expression that told her she'd just made things much worse for herself. "Feisty," he said, nodding approvingly. "The client likes them with spirit. Means they haven't been broken yet." The words hit Emma like ice water. Whatever was happening here, whatever these men had planned for her, it was far worse than simple kidnapping for ransom. And outside, Courage was running out of time to save her. Emma's scream died away, leaving behind a silence that felt thick and dangerous. The older man's smile never wavered as he stepped closer to her, his expensive shoes clicking against the concrete floor with measured precision. Everything about him spoke of controlled violence, from the way he held his hands loose at his sides to the casual way he ignored her terror. "My name is Vincent," he said conversationally, as if they were meeting at a school function rather than in an abandoned factory where she was being held against her will. "And you, little Emma Hayes, are about to become a very important part of a very profitable business." The way he said her name, like he'd been studying her, learning about her life, made Emma's stomach clench with fear. This wasn't random. These men had chosen her specifically, and they knew things about her that strangers shouldn't know. "I don't understand," Emma whispered, though part of her was beginning to understand all too well. Vincent crouched down to her eye level, and Emma caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with something else. Something that reminded her of the hospital smell that had clung to her grandmother's clothes after visiting sick friends. Death, she realized with a clarity that terrified her. This man smelled like death. "You don't need to understand, sweetheart. You just need to cooperate. There are people far away from here who are willing to pay a great deal of money for someone exactly like you. Young, pretty, from a family that won't be able to mount much of a search." His voice remained gentle, almost fatherly, which made his words even more horrifying. "Your grandmother's already received a phone call explaining that you'll be going on a very long trip." The betrayal was complete now. Emma understood with devastating clarity that no ransom was coming, no exchange would be made. Whatever Vincent's business was, it involved making children disappear permanently. Outside, Courage's barking had evolved into something Emma had never heard before, sharp, commanding bursts that seemed to be answered by barks from different directions. The street dog symphony had become a coordinated effort, and even through her terror, Emma felt a surge of pride in her little puppy's leadership. Rick returned from his unsuccessful attempt to silence the dogs, his face flushed with frustration. "They're not backing down. If anything, there's more of them now. And they're not just making random noise. It's like they're surrounding the building." Vincent's composed demeanor cracked slightly. "How many?" "At least 8, maybe 10. Mixed breeds, but some of them are big. Real big." Rick wiped sweat from his forehead. "And there's something else. I saw lights coming down the access road. Could be nothing, could be someone investigating the noise." The third man, Emma had heard Vincent call him Marcus, spoke for the first time since arriving. His voice carried a nervous energy that contrasted sharply with Vincent's cold control. "Maybe we should move her now. Use the back exit and take her to the secondary location." Vincent stood slowly, his mind clearly calculating odds and options. "No. Moving her in daylight increases exposure. We stick to the original timeline." He turned back to Emma with that same terrible smile. "Besides, our little princess here seems to have made some friends. It might be interesting to see just how far they're willing to go to help her. Emma didn't understand the implication until Vincent pulled out his phone and made a call. When someone answered, his voice took on a businesslike tone that made her blood run cold. "It's Vincent. We may have a complication at the factory. Nothing we can't handle, but I want backup units positioned at the perimeter. If any locals get too curious, make sure they understand this is private property and very dangerous to trespass." He paused, listening. "No, not yet. But be ready. And bring the equipment." Equipment. Emma's 7-year-old mind couldn't process what that might mean, but her instincts told her it was nothing good. As Vincent ended the call, Emma made a decision that would change everything. She thought about Courage out there in the gathering darkness, risking his life for her. She thought about Grandma Rose, probably sick with worry and calling the police. She thought about all the mornings she'd spent brushing Courage's fur and whispering her secrets to him, and how he'd always listened with those intelligent dark eyes that seemed to understand every word. If her puppy could be brave enough to face whatever danger waited outside these walls, she could be brave enough to help him. "He's not just a dog," Emma said suddenly, her voice cutting through the men's conversation. All three of them turned to stare at her. Vincent raised an eyebrow with mild interest. "Excuse me? Courage. The dog who's out there. He's not just making noise." Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke, fueled by desperation and love and a 7-year-old's absolute faith in her best friend. "He's smart. Really smart. And he knows this neighborhood better than you do." Vincent's smile returned, but this time it held genuine amusement. "Is that so? He knows every street, every alley, every person who belongs here and every person who doesn't." Emma was improvising now, but something told her she was also telling the truth. "And all those dogs with him? They're not strays. They belong to people. People who care about them and trust them, and will listen when they try to communicate." For the first time since entering the factory, Vincent looked genuinely concerned. "Rick, how thoroughly did you scout this location?" Rick's confidence wavered. "It's been abandoned for 5 years. No security, no regular patrols. I drove by 3 times this week and never saw another soul." "But you didn't account for the neighborhood watch system," Emma continued, her voice gaining strength from the uncertainty she saw in the men's faces. "Dogs see everything. And Courage has been mapping this whole area for 3 weeks, learning who belongs and who doesn't." She was making some of it up, but the core truth felt solid in her chest. Courage was extraordinary. She'd known it from the moment she'd found him, and now he was proving it in ways she'd never imagined. Marcus shifted nervously. "Vincent, maybe the kid has a point. I've been watching those dogs for the past hour, and their movements are too coordinated to be random. It's like they're positioning themselves strategically." Before Vincent could respond, a new sound reached them from outside. Human voices calling in the distance. Not the random chatter of people passing by, but organized calls, people searching and communicating with purpose. "Emma! Emma Hayes!" The voice was Mrs. Peterson from the corner store, carrying clearly through the broken windows. Then another voice, male this time. "Emma, can you hear us?" And another. "We're here to help, sweetheart." Vincent's face had gone pale. How many people know she's missing? Rick was already moving toward the windows, peering through gaps in the boarded-up openings. "I count at least 6 adults, maybe more. And they've got flashlights. Professional-looking search pattern. In 4 hours?" Vincent's composure was cracking completely now. How did they organize a search party in 4 hours? Emma felt a surge of hope so powerful it made her dizzy. Because that's what neighbors do. That's what people do when someone they care about is in trouble. But even as she spoke, Emma realized the terrible irony of the situation. The very people trying to save her were walking into danger they couldn't possibly understand. Vincent and his associates weren't just kidnappers. They were part of something larger and more dangerous, something that wouldn't hesitate to hurt innocent people to protect their operation. Her hope curdled into horror as Vincent's phone rang again. This time, his conversation was brief and conducted entirely in what sounded like code. "Package secure. Timeline accelerated. Cleanup protocol may be necessary." When he hung up, Vincent's smile had returned, but now it held something that made Emma wish she'd never spoken at all. "Thank you, little Emma. You've actually been quite helpful. You see, we'd planned to wait until midnight to move you, but your friends outside have created an opportunity for us to test our contingency protocols." He nodded to Marcus and Rick. "Signal the backup units. It's time for the neighborhood to learn what happens when people interfere with our business." Emma's blood turned to ice as she understood what she'd done. In trying to show these men that help was coming, she'd instead given them targets. Every person out there searching for her, Mrs. Peterson, the voices she didn't recognize, maybe even police officers, was now in danger because of her. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No. Leave them alone. They don't know anything." "But they're learning," Vincent said calmly. "And we can't allow that to happen." Outside, Courage's barking suddenly changed pitch, becoming sharp and urgent in a way that made every dog in the pack respond with immediate alarm. The canine warning system that had been building for hours reached a crescendo that could be heard for blocks. Through the factory windows, Emma could see lights moving in the distance. Not the scattered flashlights of searchers, but organized, purposeful illumination that was getting closer fast. Vincent's backup had arrived. And now the real catastrophe was about to begin. Meanwhile, 3 miles away at the Hayes house, Rose was no longer alone. Mrs. Chin had arrived 20 minutes ago with Officer Sarah Martinez, a community police officer who'd been patrolling the neighborhood for 2 years and knew most of the families by name. Behind them came Mr. and Mrs. Johnson from 2 houses down, followed by Tony from the gas station and Mrs. Williams who ran the community center. What had started as one grandmother's frantic worry had become a mobilized neighborhood in less than 4 hours. "Tell me again about the dog's behavior," Officer Martinez said, kneeling down to examine Courage, who had returned to the house 10 minutes ago but refused to stay inside. The puppy kept running to the door, scratching urgently, then returning to the humans as if trying to communicate something vital. "He's been agitated since noon," Rose explained, her voice tight with worry. "Emma found him 3 weeks ago, right around the corner from where she should have walked today. He's never acted like this before. It's like he knows something terrible has happened." Officer Martinez had worked with K-9 units before transferring to community policing. She recognized intelligence when she saw it, and this small puppy was displaying problem-solving behavior that rivaled trained search dogs. "Mrs. Hayes, I need you to think carefully. Has Emma mentioned anyone bothering her lately? Anyone paying unusual attention to her or asking questions?" Rose shook her head, but Mrs. Chin spoke up. "There was a man asking questions at my flower shop 2 days ago. Said he was looking for a house to rent in the neighborhood, but something felt off about him. He asked specifically about families with children, which families had been here longest." Officer Martinez felt her instincts prickle. "Can you describe him?" "Middle-aged, white leather jacket. Expensive shoes, but trying to look casual. He had this way of looking at everything like he was memorizing it." That was when Courage made his decision. The puppy had been listening to the human conversation with that same intense focus Rose had noticed from the beginning, and something in the discussion triggered a response. He ran to Officer Martinez, grabbed the hem of her uniform pants in his teeth, and began pulling toward the door with surprising strength. "He wants us to follow him," Mrs. Chin said softly. Officer Martinez had seen enough to trust her instincts. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm calling for backup and a K-9 unit. But I think your granddaughter's dog might be our best lead right now." As she made the call, Courage continued his urgent pantomime, running to the door and back, his dark eyes holding a desperate intelligence that was impossible to ignore. "Dispatch, this is Martinez. I need backup units and a K-9 team to respond to 412 Maple Street for a missing child case. And I need them to prepare for possible kidnapping scenario." She paused, watching Courage's behavior. "The child has been missing for 4 hours, and we have reason to believe she may still be in the immediate area." What Officer Martinez didn't know was that at that very moment, across town at the textile factory, Vincent was giving orders that would turn a rescue mission into something far more dangerous. "I want a perimeter established around the entire factory complex." Vincent spoke into his phone with cold efficiency. "Anyone approaching gets 1 warning to leave. If they don't comply immediately, contain them. We can't afford witnesses tonight." Back in the factory, Emma was discovering that horror could exist in layers. The immediate terror of being kidnapped had been awful enough, but learning that these men trafficked children had been worse. Now, realizing that her rescue attempt might get innocent people hurt or killed, she felt like she was drowning in guilt and fear. But as she sat in the growing darkness of the abandoned factory, listening to the coordinated movement of men and vehicles outside, Emma also felt something else growing inside her chest. Not hope exactly, but determination. The same quality she'd seen in Courage when he'd faced down the raccoon that had invaded their garbage can last week, or when he'd stood his ground against the much larger dog that had tried to bully him at the neighborhood park. If courage could be brave, so could she. The next few hours would test that courage beyond anything a 7-year-old should ever have to endure. Because outside in the darkness, two groups were converging on the textile factory with very different intentions. One group was armed with flashlights, love, and determination to bring a little girl home safely. The other was armed with weapons, experience, and a willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect their criminal enterprise. And caught between them was a small puppy who had never backed down from a fight when someone he loved was in danger. The inciting catastrophe wasn't just Emma's kidnapping anymore. It was the collision course between innocence and evil, between a community's love and an organization's greed, between a little girl's faith in the goodness of the world and the reality of how dark that world could be. But in that darkness, something extraordinary was about to happen. Because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, like rescuing a scared puppy from the side of the road, create ripples that grow into waves powerful enough to wash away even the deepest evil. Emma just had to survive long enough to see it happen. Outside, Courage's barking reached a new level of urgency. He had found her, he had brought help, and now he was calling every dog, every human, every force for good in a 10-block radius to converge on this place. The real battle was about to begin. The first deception came wrapped in the uniform of a security guard. Officer Martinez was leading the search party down Industrial Boulevard when a man in a crisp security uniform approached their group with practiced authority. His badge looked official, his demeanor was professional, and his concern seemed genuine as he raised his hand to halt their progress. "Excuse me, folks, I'm going to need you to turn around," he said, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that people instinctively obeyed. "We've had reports of structural damage to several buildings in this area. City Inspector was out here this afternoon and red-tagged the whole complex as unsafe for civilian access." Officer Martinez felt something cold settle in her stomach. In her 2 years patrolling this neighborhood, she'd never seen this man before, and she knew every legitimate security officer who worked the industrial district. But his uniform was pristine, his badge number was clearly visible, and he was holding an official-looking clipboard with city letterhead. "I wasn't notified of any structural inspections scheduled for today," she said carefully, her hand instinctively moving closer to her radio. The fake security guard's smile never wavered. "Emergency assessment, ma'am. Came in this afternoon after a concerned citizen reported possible foundation issues. You know how these old factory buildings can be, one wrong step, and the whole floor could give way." Behind Officer Martinez, the search party had stopped, uncertainty rippling through the group. Mrs. Peterson clutched her flashlight tighter, while Mr. Johnson stepped protectively closer to his wife. They wanted to believe this was just bureaucratic interference, but the timing felt wrong. At Officer Martinez's feet, Courage had gone completely still. The puppy's body language had shifted from urgent determination to something that looked almost like hunting behavior. His ears were pinned forward, his nose was working overtime, and a low growl was building in his throat, so quiet that only Officer Martinez could hear it. "Officer," Mrs. Chen whispered, "that man smells wrong." "What do you mean?" "Gun oil, fresh cigarettes, and something else, something chemical." Mrs. Chen had grown up in a neighborhood where survival meant learning to read danger in all its forms. "That's not a city worker." Officer Martinez made her decision. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification beyond your badge. And I'll need the contact information for the city inspector who allegedly issued this red tag." The fake security guard's professional demeanor cracked just slightly. "Ma'am, I'm trying to keep you and these civilians safe. The liability issues alone. Identification. Now." That's when Courage made his move. The puppy shot forward like a small brown and white bullet, weaving between the adult's legs before anyone could react. He'd been tracking scents for the past hour, building a mental map of who belonged in this area and who didn't, and this man's chemical signature was all wrong. Courage latched onto the security guard's pant leg and began pulling with surprising strength, his growls becoming audible to everyone in the search party. "Get this mutt off me." The man's calm facade evaporated as he tried to shake Courage loose. But the puppy held on with the tenacity of a dog who knew he was protecting something precious. That's when Officer Martinez saw it, the unmistakable outline of a shoulder holster beneath the man's security jacket, and more importantly, the small radio earpiece that definitely wasn't city-issued equipment. "Everyone back," she shouted, drawing her weapon as the fake security guard reached for his own gun. "Police! Drop your weapon." The confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds, but it shattered the illusion that this was still a simple search for a missing child. As backup units arrived and the fake security guard was taken into custody, Officer Martinez realized they weren't just looking for Emma anymore. They were walking into a war zone. Inside the textile factory, Emma was learning that monsters could speak in gentle tones and smile while planning atrocities. Vincent had received 3 phone calls in the past hour, each one making him more pleased and more dangerous. The first had confirmed that backup units were in position around the factory complex. The second had informed him that local law enforcement was being managed through a combination of false information and strategic misdirection. The third call had made him smile in a way that turned Emma's blood to ice. "Yes, the package is secure," Vincent had said into his phone, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone discussing shipping logistics rather than a child's life. "And the situation has actually improved our position. We'll have multiple test subjects for the new protocols." Test subjects. The words rolled around in Emma's mind like poison, and she understood with horrible clarity that the people trying to rescue her had become targets themselves. "Marcus, bring me the case from the van," Vincent ordered, his voice taking on the crisp efficiency of someone switching into operational mode. "And tell our perimeter teams to begin Phase 2. It's time to demonstrate what happens when people interfere with our business." Emma watched Marcus leave and return with a black case that looked disturbingly medical. When Vincent opened it, she caught a glimpse of syringes, small bottles filled with clear liquid, and electronic devices she couldn't identify but that radiated an aura of clinical menace. "You see, Emma," Vincent said conversationally as he began preparing what looked like an injection, "your little rescue party has actually done us a favor. We've been looking for an opportunity to field test some new techniques for managing civilian interference. Your friends are going to help us perfect our methods." Emma's mind reeled. "What are you going to do to them?" "Nothing permanent." "Well, not immediately." Vincent's smile was the most terrifying thing Emma had ever seen. "We've developed some very interesting compounds that can create temporary memory gaps. Very useful for making witnesses forget they ever saw anything unusual." The implication hit Emma like a physical blow. These men weren't just planning to hurt the people trying to save her. They were going to erase their memories of the entire experience. The search party would wake up tomorrow with no recollection of why they'd come to the factory district, no memory of Emma being missing, no ability to help the police understand what had really happened. "But first," Vincent continued, "we're going to deal with your little friend outside, the one making all that noise." Through the factory windows, Courage's barking had evolved into something that sounded like battlefield communication. Short, sharp bursts followed by longer, more complex patterns that seemed to be answered by different dogs from various positions around the building. Emma could hear at least 8 distinct voices now, maybe more, all of them coordinating in ways that defied every assumption about random street dogs. "Rick, take a tranquilizer gun and deal with the mutts," Vincent ordered. "Start with the little brown one that seems to be leading them. Once we remove their coordinator, the rest should scatter." "No!" Emma's voice echoed off the concrete walls with such force that all 3 men turned to stare at her. "Please don't hurt him. He's just a puppy." Vincent's expression softened into something that might have looked like sympathy if Emma hadn't learned to read the coldness behind his eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, we're not going to hurt him. We're just going to put him to sleep for a while. And when he wakes up, he'll be somewhere far away where he can't cause any more trouble." The casual way Vincent spoke about disposing of Courage, like he was solving a minor logistics problem, made Emma realize that this man saw every living thing as either useful or disposable. She and Courage had moved from the useful category to the disposable one, and that transition was going to happen very soon. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Emma heard something in Courage's barking that made her heart skip. The pattern had changed again, becoming more urgent, but also more organized. It wasn't random noise anymore. It was communication, and it was getting responses from directions she hadn't heard before. Her puppy wasn't just coordinating the dogs anymore. He was calling every ally he could find. 2 miles away, at the police station, Detective Ray Morrison was studying a map that had been bothering him all evening. 3 separate incidents in the past 4 hours had created a pattern that made his 20 years of experience scream warnings. First, a missing child report from a reliable neighborhood, with witnesses describing suspicious vehicle activity. Second, a fake security checkpoint that had detained a legitimate search party, staffed by an armed man with no identification who was carrying surveillance equipment that definitely wasn't civilian grade. Third, multiple reports of coordinated dog activity in the industrial district, with residents describing behavior that sounded more like military reconnaissance than random animal movement. Individually, each incident could be explained away. Together, they suggested something much larger and more dangerous than a simple kidnapping. Martinez, Detective Morrison spoke into his radio. "What's your current status?" Officer Martinez's voice came back tense but controlled. "We've got the fake security officer in custody, but he's not talking. Found radio equipment on him that's definitely not standard civilian gear. Also found this." She paused, and Morrison could hear paper rustling. A map of the neighborhood with specific houses marked. Emma Hayes' house is circled in red, but so are 6 other homes with children. Morrison felt ice form in his veins. "This isn't random." "No, sir, it's not. And Detective, the dog, Emma's puppy, he's not acting like a lost pet anymore. He's acting like a trained search animal. I've worked with K-9 units, and this little guy is displaying tactical awareness that's off the charts." Morrison stared at his map, watching a bigger picture emerge from the scattered incidents. "Martinez, I want you to pull your team back and wait for backup. We're not dealing with opportunistic kidnappers here. Sir, with respect, I don't think we have time for backup. Whatever's happening at that factory, it's happening now. And I think that puppy is the only one who knows exactly where the girl is." Back at the factory, the first shot came without warning. Rick had positioned himself at a second-story window with what looked like a high-end tranquilizer rifle, the kind used by wildlife management professionals. Emma watched in horror as he lined up his sights on Courage, who was standing at the edge of the parking lot, silhouetted against the distant streetlights. "Clean shot," Rick muttered, his finger tightening on the trigger. That's when the street dogs made their move. What happened next would be talked about in the neighborhood for years afterward. 8 dogs, ranging from a massive Rottweiler mix to a 3-legged beagle, launched a coordinated assault on the factory building that displayed tactical sophistication no one would have believed possible. The Rottweiler mix hit the main entrance at the same moment the German Shepherd rammed the loading dock door. 2 smaller dogs squeezed through gaps in the perimeter fence and began barking from different positions, creating confusion about where the main attack was coming from. The 3-legged beagle, despite his disability, somehow made it onto the roof and began barking down through broken skylights. And Courage, the supposed target, had vanished completely from Rick's line of sight. What the hell? Rick spun around, searching for his target, but Courage had used the distraction of his pack's assault to disappear into the shadows. The dogs weren't just attacking randomly, they were implementing a strategy. Create multiple points of pressure, divide the enemy's attention, and give the specialist, Courage, the opportunity to complete the real mission, finding Emma. "Vincent," Rick's voice carried panic now. "These aren't normal strays. They're coordinating like they've been trained." Vincent's composure finally cracked completely. "Impossible. They're just animals." But even as he spoke, Vincent could hear the evidence contradicting him. The barking had divided into distinct patterns, some dogs maintaining pressure on the building's weak points, others calling back and forth in what sounded disturbingly like tactical communication, and one voice, definitely Courage, moving through the building's interior with purpose that suggested detailed knowledge of the layout. How could a puppy know the building layout? Marcus asked, echoing Vincent's thoughts. Emma, despite her terror, felt a surge of pride that almost brought tears to her eyes. "Because he's been here before," she said softly. "Dogs explore everything. He's probably been in and out of this building a dozen times, mapping every room, every entrance, every hiding spot." Vincent stared at her with an expression that mixed rage and something that might have been respect. "You're telling me that Mutt has been conducting reconnaissance? I'm telling you that you underestimated him." Emma's voice grew stronger. "You underestimated all of them. You thought you were just dealing with random street dogs and a scared little girl. But we're a family, and families protect each other." That's when the lights went out. The factory was plunged into absolute darkness as someone, or something, tripped the main electrical breaker. Emergency lighting should have kicked in immediately, but those systems had been disabled years ago when the factory closed. In the darkness, Vincent's voice carried deadly calm. Night vision goggles. "Now!" But before anyone could respond, a new sound reached them through the darkness. Not barking this time, but human voices, much closer than they'd been an hour ago. Emma! Emma, can you hear us? We're coming. The search party had found them. But Vincent's response wasn't panic. It was anticipation. Perfect timing, he said into his radio. Begin containment protocol. I want every civilian within a half-mile radius secured for processing. Emma's blood turned to ice as she realized what Vincent meant. The people trying to save her weren't walking into a rescue operation anymore. They were walking into a trap that would turn them all into victims. And somewhere in the darkness around her, Courage was moving with the stealth and purpose of a predator closing in on his prey. But Emma couldn't tell if her puppy would reach her before Vincent's people reached the search party. The pressure had been building for hours. Now it was about to explode in ways that would change everything, if anyone survived long enough to see the aftermath. Outside, more vehicles were arriving. Not civilian cars this time, but unmarked vans and SUVs that carried Vincent's backup teams. The factory complex was becoming a battlefield, with innocent people caught in the crossfire. And in the center of it all, a 7-year-old girl sat in the darkness, holding on to her faith in the goodness of the world, while evil prepared to demonstrate just how powerful it could be. But Emma wasn't the same terrified child who'd been dragged into this factory hours ago. She'd learned that courage came in many forms, sometimes as a puppy who refused to abandon someone he loved, sometimes as neighbors who dropped everything to search for a missing child, sometimes as a police officer who trusted her instincts over official protocol. And sometimes, courage came as a 7-year-old girl who decided that no matter what happened next, she wasn't going to let the monsters win without a fight. In the darkness, she heard Courage's soft panting somewhere very close. He'd found her. He'd actually found her. Now they just had to survive what came next. The soft panting in the darkness belonged to Courage, but when Emma reached out to touch him, her fingers found something warm and wet that made her heart stop. Blood. Courage, she whispered, her hands moving frantically over his small body in the absolute darkness. He was trembling, not from fear but from pain, and when she found the source of the bleeding, Emma's world tilted sideways. A dart was embedded in his left shoulder, the same kind Rick had been loading into his tranquilizer rifle. But something had gone wrong. Either the dosage was too high for a puppy his size, or the dart had hit wrong, because Courage was fighting to stay conscious even as whatever chemical they'd used tried to drag him under. No, 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 Emma breathed, cradling his small head in her lap. Stay with me, boy. Please stay with me. Courage's dark eyes found hers in the darkness, and even through his pain, Emma could see that same intelligence that had first drawn her to him. He was trying to tell her something, his weak whimpers forming patterns that almost sounded like words. That's when she heard Vincent's voice, much closer than before. Touching reunion, he said, and Emma could hear the satisfaction in his tone. But I'm afraid playtime is over. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, temporarily blinding Emma. When her eyes adjusted, she saw that Vincent was standing less than 10 feet away, and he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a figure that made Emma's blood turn to ice. Officer Martinez. But the woman wasn't pointing her weapon at Vincent. She was pointing it at Emma. Very good work, Sarah, Vincent said approvingly. Right on schedule. Emma's mind refused to process what she was seeing. Officer Martinez? I don't understand. The woman who had seemed so concerned about Emma's safety, who had organized the search party and promised to bring her home, smiled with the same cold calculation Emma had learned to recognize in Vincent's expression. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but there are some things you're too young to understand. Officer Martinez's voice carried none of the warmth Emma remembered from just hours ago. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. The betrayal hit Emma like a physical blow, but it was Vincent's next words that shattered her world completely. You see, Emma, your rescue tonight was never random. Your Officer Martinez here has been watching your family for months, waiting for the right opportunity. Vincent crouched down to Emma's level, his flashlight casting grotesque shadows on the concrete walls. Tell me, has your grandmother ever mentioned a man named David Chin? Perhaps mentioned that he was your father. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her father was a soldier named Michael Hayes, serving in Iraq. Grandma Rose had pictures of him in uniform, letters he'd sent, stories about how he'd fallen in love with Emma's mother before deploying overseas. I don't know anyone named David Chin, Emma whispered. Vincent's smile grew wider. Of course you don't, because Rose Hayes has been lying to you your entire life. The words hit Emma like hammer blows, each one destroying another piece of the foundation she'd built her world on. But Vincent wasn't finished. David Chun was a very wealthy man who made some very poor business decisions 7 years ago. He lost everything: his companies, his investments, his reputation. But before he disappeared, he hid a considerable amount of money in accounts that can only be accessed by his biological daughter. Emma shook her head frantically. That's not true. My father is Michael Hayes. He's a soldier. He's coming home soon. Michael Hayes died in combat 18 months ago, Officer Martinez said with casual cruelty. Your grandmother has been intercepting the military's attempts to notify you. She's been writing those letters herself, creating an elaborate fiction to protect you from the truth. The revelation hit Emma like a tsunami, washing away everything she thought she knew about her life. The father she'd been waiting for, the soldier she'd been so proud of, the homecoming she'd been dreaming about, all of it was lies. But Vincent wasn't done destroying her world. Rose Hayes isn't your grandmother either, he continued, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone revealing a carefully constructed puzzle. She's David Chen's former housekeeper. When he disappeared and left you behind, she took you in and created an entirely new identity for both of you. Emma's mind reeled as the implications crashed over her. Every story Grandma Rose had told her, every photo she'd treasured, every memory she'd cherished, all of it was built on deception. Why? Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. Because David Chen's daughter, you, are the key to recovering millions of dollars in hidden assets. Money that my employers have been searching for ever since Chen vanished. Vincent's expression turned businesslike. Your DNA, your biometric data, your voice patterns, they're all needed to access accounts that Chen set up before he disappeared. Officer Martinez stepped closer, her weapon still trained on Emma. The beauty of the plan was that Rose Hayes did all the hard work for us. She kept you safe, kept you healthy, made sure you developed normally. All we had to do was wait until you were old enough for the biometric scanners to get reliable readings. Emma felt like she was drowning in revelations, each one more devastating than the last. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. Of course, once we access the accounts, you become a liability, Vincent said conversationally. 7-year-olds aren't very good at keeping secrets, and there are too many people who might ask questions about where you've been. The meaning was clear even to Emma's young mind. They were planning to kill her once they got what they needed. But as crushing as these revelations were, Emma found herself focusing on something else entirely. In her lap, Courage was fighting against the effects of the tranquilizer with a determination that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. His small body was trembling with the effort, but his eyes remained fixed on hers, and she could see that he was trying to stay conscious for her sake. There's just one problem with your plan, Emma said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Vincent raised an eyebrow. Oh, you're wrong about Rose. Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke. She might not be my biological grandmother, but she's my family. She chose to love me when she didn't have to. She chose to protect me when it would have been easier to walk away. She chose to give me a life filled with kindness and safety and hope. Officer Martinez laughed, but there was something forced about the sound. Sweet sentiment, kid, but it doesn't change the facts. The facts are that you're both pathetic, Emma continued, her fear transforming into anger. You think love is about blood and money and biological connections. But real love is about choice. Rose chose to be my family. Courage chose to risk his life for me. The neighbors chose to search for me when I went missing. Vincent's smile faltered slightly. Philosophical discussions aside. And all of you, Emma's voice rose to fill the empty factory space, chose to be monsters. You chose to hurt children. You chose to betray trust. You chose to be the kind of people the world would be better without. The accusation hit Officer Martinez harder than Emma had expected. For just a moment, the woman's confident facade cracked, revealing something that might have been shame or regret. You don't understand the situation, Officer Martinez said, but her voice lacked conviction. Sometimes people have to make difficult choices. You chose to kidnap a 7-year-old girl for money. Emma's fury was fully unleashed now. There's nothing difficult about that choice. There's nothing complicated about deciding not to hurt children. That's when the first explosion rocked the building. The concussion wave knocked everyone to the ground, and Emma's ears rang with a high-pitched whine that made thinking difficult. Emergency lighting flickered on for a few seconds before dying again. But in that brief illumination, Emma saw Vincent's face transform from confident control to something approaching panic. What the hell was that? He barked into his radio. The response came back in bursts of static and shouting. Under attack, multiple units down. They came out of nowhere. A second explosion, closer this time, shook dust from the factory's ceiling and made the entire structure groan ominously. "Sir!" Marcus's voice came from somewhere in the darkness, high with panic. "We've got a problem. The perimeter teams aren't responding, and there are vehicles approaching from all directions." Vincent's radio crackled with increasingly frantic reports. "Team 3 is down. Repeat, Team 3 is down. Unknown vehicles breaching the south entrance. We need immediate backup at the main gate." "Sir, these aren't civilians. These people are armed and they know what they're doing." Emma felt a surge of hope so powerful it made her dizzy. Someone was coming for her, not just the neighborhood search party, but people with the training and equipment to take on Vincent's organization. But Vincent's next words crushed that hope immediately. "Emergency Protocol 7, he spoke into his radio with deadly calm. "Initiate building lockdown and prepare for scorched earth contingency." Emma didn't understand the tactical terminology, but Officer Martinez's face went pale. "Vincent, you can't be serious. There are innocent people in those search teams." "The operation is compromised," Vincent replied with chilling pragmatism. "We cut our losses and eliminate all witnesses. All of them." The meaning was clear. Vincent was planning to kill everyone. The search party, the rescue teams, anyone who might have learned about his organization's activities. Including Emma. "You're insane," Officer Martinez whispered, and for the first time since revealing her betrayal, she sounded genuinely horrified. "I signed up to kidnap one kid for money, not massacre half the neighborhood." Vincent's smile returned, but now it held something that made Emma's skin crawl. "That's the beauty of compartmentalized operations, Sarah. You only knew what you needed to know. But this organization handles much more than simple kidnapping. We clean up loose ends, and tonight there are quite a few loose ends to clean up." Officer Martinez's weapon wavered, and Emma could see the woman realizing that she'd gotten involved with something far worse than she'd imagined. "I'm not doing this. I'm not killing innocent people." "You don't have a choice anymore," Vincent said calmly, pulling out his own weapon. "You're either part of the solution or part of the problem." The standoff lasted exactly 3 seconds before Officer Martinez made her decision. She spun toward Vincent, trying to bring her weapon around, but he was faster. The gunshot echoed through the factory like thunder, and Officer Martinez collapsed to the concrete floor. Emma screamed, the sound torn from her throat by horror and fear and rage. In her lap, courage struggled against the tranquilizer's effects, trying to get between Emma and Vincent despite his weakened condition. "Now then," Vincent said conversationally, stepping over Officer Martinez's motionless form. "Where were we?" But before he could continue, another sound reached them through the factory's broken windows. Not explosions this time, but something that made Vincent's confident expression falter. Dogs barking. Not just Courage's pack, but dozens of voices calling out in the night. And underneath the canine chorus, human voices shouting orders with military precision. "Sir!" Marcus's voice cracked with panic. "The building is completely surrounded. And sir, these aren't local police. These people have federal badges and military equipment." Vincent's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, calculation, and finally, something that looked like recognition. "Chun," he whispered. "That bastard actually did it." Emma looked up through her tears. "What are you talking about?" Vincent's laugh held no humor whatsoever. "Your father, your real father, was smarter than we gave him credit for. Before he disappeared, he didn't just hide his money. He left instructions that if anything ever happened to you, certain people would be notified. People with the resources and authorization to burn my entire organization to the ground." The implications hit Emma like a physical blow. Her father, the man she'd never known existed until an hour ago, had somehow arranged for her protection even from beyond the grave. "He knew we'd come for you eventually," Vincent continued, his voice carrying grudging respect. "He knew that his daughter would be the key to finding his hidden assets. And he prepared for that possibility." Outside, the sounds of tactical operations were getting closer. Precise, coordinated movements that spoke of professional military or law enforcement teams closing in on the building. But Vincent's next words shattered Emma's momentary hope. "Unfortunately for everyone involved, my organization has protocols for exactly this situation." He pulled a small device from his pocket, something that looked like a smartphone but with additional buttons and displays Emma didn't recognize. "This building has been rigged with enough explosives to level a city block. If we can't complete our mission, we make sure no one else can either." Emma's blood turned to ice. You're going to blow up the building? With everyone inside. With everyone in a quarter-mile radius, Vincent corrected. Your rescue teams, your search parties, your federal agents, they'll all be reduced to debris. And any evidence of our operation will be destroyed along with them. The devastation was complete now. Emma had lost her father before she'd even known he existed. She'd learned that her entire life had been built on lies, even if they were lies told from love. She'd watched someone she'd trusted reveal themselves as a monster, then watched that same person die trying to protect her. And now she was going to die along with everyone who had tried to save her. In her lap, Courage made a sound that was half whimper, half growl. Despite the tranquilizer coursing through his system, despite his pain and weakness, he was still trying to protect her. I'm sorry, boy, Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry I got you into this. But Courage's response surprised her. Instead of the weak whimper she expected, he managed a sound that was almost like speech, a soft vocalization that sounded remarkably like no. Emma looked down at him in amazement. Courage. The puppy's dark eyes met hers, and in them she saw not resignation or fear, but determination. He was telling her something, communicating with the same intelligence that had allowed him to organize a pack of street dogs and track her across the city. He wasn't giving up, and he was telling her not to give up either. Vincent was speaking into his radio, giving final instructions to his remaining team members. The explosive device was in his other hand, his thumb hovering over what was obviously a detonation trigger. But Emma was no longer listening to him. She was focused entirely on Courage, on the message he was trying to convey through sheer force of will despite the chemicals in his system. Trust. Hope. Fight. The devastation had been complete, but devastation wasn't the end of the story. Sometimes it was just the clearing away of lies and illusions, making space for truth and courage to grow. Emma wiped her tears and made a decision that would define the rest of her life, however long that might be. She wasn't going to die as a victim. She was going to die fighting, just like Courage had taught her. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to save everyone else. Outside, the tactical teams were seconds away from breaching the building. Vincent's thumb was tightening on the detonation trigger. And in the darkness of an abandoned factory, a 7-year-old girl and her injured puppy prepared to make their last stand against evil. The midpoint devastation was complete. But the story wasn't over yet. Emma's decision to fight lasted exactly 12 seconds before reality crushed it completely. Vincent's thumb pressed down on the detonation trigger, and Emma braced herself for the explosion that would end everything. But instead of the world-ending blast she expected, Vincent's device emitted a soft beep and displayed a message that made his face go white. Signal blocked, detonation failed. What? Vincent stared at the device in disbelief, pressing the trigger again and again. Each time, the same message appeared. This is impossible. The charges are hardwired. There's no way to block the signal from outside. That's when a new voice cut through the darkness, calm, professional, and carrying an authority that made Vincent freeze. Vincent Kozlov. This is FBI Special Agent Rebecca Santos. The building is surrounded, your detonation devices have been neutralized, and you have 30 seconds to surrender before we breach. Emma felt a surge of hope, but it died instantly when Vincent's shock transformed into something far more dangerous, desperation. A cornered predator was infinitely more deadly than a confident one. They can't have neutralized everything, Vincent muttered, pulling out a second device, this one smaller, with a physical switch rather than electronic controls. The backup charges are on a closed circuit. No wireless signal to block. Emma's heart sank as she realized what Vincent was holding. A dead man's switch. As long as he kept his thumb pressed down on it, nothing would happen. But the moment he released pressure, whether by choice or by death, the explosives would detonate. You're going to kill yourself too, Emma whispered. Vincent's smile returned, but now it held the manic edge of someone who had nothing left to lose. Better than spending life in federal prison. And my organization will consider it an acceptable loss if it eliminates this much evidence and these many witnesses. Outside, Agent Santos' voice came again. Mr. Kozlov, we know about the dead man's switch. We also know you're holding Emma Hayes. Release the child and we can discuss terms. Vincent laughed, a sound that made Emma's skin crawl. Terms? The only term that matters is this. Everyone backs away and lets me walk out of here with the girl, or I take my thumb off this switch and turn 6 city blocks into a crater. Emma realized with crystalline clarity that she wasn't just a hostage anymore. She was the only thing preventing Vincent from committing mass murder. As long as the FBI thought they could save her, they'd be forced to negotiate. But the moment they gave up on rescuing her, "They're not going to let you go," Emma said softly. "You know that, right? Even if they back away now, they'll follow you. They'll find you eventually." "Maybe," Vincent agreed. "But I'll have time to complete the asset recovery and disappear properly. Your biometric data is worth more than my life, little Chin. Much more." The casual way he spoke about her death, as if it were just another business expense, made Emma feel hollow inside. But it was his next revelation that truly broke her. "Besides, the extraction team is already en route. They'll be here in 20 minutes to collect you and the biological samples we need. Even if I don't make it out of this building, the mission will be completed." "Biological samples?" Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. Vincent's expression turned almost apologetic. "I'm afraid the account access protocols require more than just fingerprints and retinal scans. They need tissue samples for DNA verification. Your father was quite thorough in his security measures." Emma's mind reeled as she understood what Vincent was telling her. They weren't just planning to use her to access her father's accounts. They were planning to harvest parts of her body to do it. The hopelessness was complete now. Even if the FBI somehow managed to stop Vincent, his organization had backup plans and extraction teams. Even if she survived the next hour, she'd spend the rest of her life running from people who saw her as a biological key to vast wealth. In her lap, courage stirred weakly. The tranquilizer was winning its battle against his determination, and Emma could see his small body starting to go limp. Soon, he'd be unconscious completely, leaving her truly alone in the darkness. "I'm sorry," she whispered to him, her tears falling onto his brown and white fur. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you the way you protected me." That's when she heard it, a sound so soft she almost missed it among the tactical communications echoing from outside. Courage was making a noise that wasn't quite a whimper and wasn't quite a bark. It was something else entirely, something that sounded almost like words. Emma leaned closer, straining to hear. Courage's dark eyes were fixed on hers with desperate intensity, and his small mouth was moving in patterns that seemed deliberate, purposeful. "Roof," came the barely audible sound. "Roof." Emma's breath caught. Was Courage actually trying to speak, or was her traumatized mind creating patterns where none existed? "Roof." Now, this time there was no doubt. Somehow, through sheer force of will and the bond they'd forged over 3 weeks of love and trust, Courage was communicating with her in ways that should have been impossible. Emma glanced up toward the factory's ceiling, 30 feet above them. The structure was riddled with broken skylights and gaps where maintenance access had been left open when the building was abandoned. If someone could reach the roof. But the realization came with crushing despair. Even if Courage was trying to tell her about some escape route or rescue plan, he was barely conscious, and she was a 7-year-old girl being watched by an armed man with a dead man's switch. There was no way to act on whatever information he was trying to share. Vincent noticed her upward glance and smiled with cruel understanding. "Looking for divine intervention, sweetheart? I'm afraid God doesn't make house calls to abandoned factories." That's when the first rope dropped through the largest skylight. Vincent spun around, his weapon tracking toward the movement, but more ropes began descending through other openings. Dark figures rappelled down with professional precision, moving in coordinated silence that spoke of extensive training. "Impossible," Vincent breathed. "The building is supposed to be electronically monitored. Any breach should have triggered." His words cut off as he realized what had happened. The same signal jamming that had disabled his primary detonation device had also blinded his security systems. The FBI hadn't just blocked his explosives. They'd created a technological blackout that allowed their tactical teams to approach undetected. But Vincent still held the dead man's switch, and his thumb was still the only thing preventing massive destruction. "Stop right there," he shouted at the descending figures. "One more inch and I level this entire district." The tactical team froze in place, suspended on their ropes like deadly ornaments hanging from the factory's ceiling. Emma could see their faces now, professional, determined, but also frustrated by the impossible situation. They were close enough to end this, but not close enough to stop Vincent from taking his thumb off the switch. Agent Santos's voice echoed from outside. "Mr. Kozlov, you're surrounded by the best tactical team in the federal system. There's no escape. Release the child and surrender the device." Vincent's laugh held genuine amusement now. "Your best tactical team is hanging from my ceiling like Christmas decorations. One twitch of my thumb, and they become part of the debris field. Emma watched the standoff develop with growing horror. The rescuers were here, but they were as trapped as she was. Vincent held all the cards, and he knew it. But Courage wasn't finished communicating. "Emma," came his barely audible voice, and this time she was certain she wasn't imagining it. "Trust. Move. Now." Emma looked down at her puppy in amazement. Despite the tranquilizer, despite his injury, despite being barely conscious, Courage was trying to coordinate something. But what could an injured 7-week-old puppy possibly do against armed men and explosive devices? That's when she remembered something that had been bothering her since the tactical team's arrival. Vincent had said the building was electronically monitored, but how had Courage navigated the factory so easily in complete darkness? How had he found her so quickly in a building with dozens of rooms and multiple floors? The answer hit her like lightning. Courage hadn't just been exploring this building over the past 3 weeks. He'd been mapping it, learning it, understanding it in ways that human security systems couldn't anticipate. Dogs didn't rely on electronics or technology. They relied on scent, sound, and spatial memory that was thousands of years older and infinitely more reliable than any human invention. "Vincent," Emma said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. He turned toward her, keeping his weapon trained on the suspended tactical team. "What? You made one mistake," Emma said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Oh, and what's that? You assumed Courage was just a puppy." Vincent's expression shifted to confusion, then irritation. "What the hell are you talking about?" That's when Courage made his move. Despite the tranquilizer, despite his injury, despite being barely able to stand, the small puppy launched himself from Emma's lap with every ounce of strength he had left. But he didn't attack Vincent directly. That would have been suicide for an animal his size. Instead, he went for Vincent's ankle with surgical precision, sinking his small teeth into the exact spot where tendons and nerves created maximum vulnerability. Vincent screamed and reflexively jerked his leg, throwing off his balance and causing his weapon to swing away from the tactical team. For exactly 1.3 seconds, his attention was completely focused on the small predator attached to his ankle. 1.3 seconds was all the FBI's best tactical team needed. 3 things happened simultaneously. First, the team member closest to Vincent fired a specialized capture net that wrapped around the man's torso and arms, immobilizing him without causing him to release the dead man's switch. Second, a second team member dropped directly onto Vincent's position with a device Emma had never seen before. Something that looked like a small mechanical claw designed to maintain constant pressure on the switch regardless of what happened to Vincent's thumb. Third, Agent Santos's voice boomed through concealed speakers. "Switch secured. All units move in." The factory erupted with coordinated movement as tactical teams poured through every entrance. Vincent found himself immobilized, disarmed, and completely surrounded in less than 10 seconds. But Emma was no longer watching the tactical operation. She was cradling Courage, who had collapsed immediately after his heroic attack. The effort had cost him everything he had left, and the tranquilizer was finally claiming victory over his determination. "Stay with me," Emma whispered, her tears falling onto his fur. "Please, Courage. You did it. You saved everyone. Just stay with me a little longer." Courage's dark eyes found hers one last time. His small mouth moved, and Emma leaned close to hear his final words. "Love you," came the barely audible sound. "Always love you." Then his eyes closed, and his small body went completely limp. "No!" Emma's scream echoed through the factory like a siren. "Medic! I need a medic. Please." Agent Santos appeared beside her, speaking rapidly into her radio. "I need veterinary medical support immediately. Small dog, tranquilizer overdose, critical condition." But even as the agent called for help, Emma could see the truth in her eyes. Courage had given everything he had to save her and the tactical team. The tranquilizer dosage that might have been survivable for a larger dog was too much for a 7-week-old puppy who'd already been injured. Emma had been rescued. Vincent had been captured. The explosive threat had been neutralized. The criminal organization would be dismantled. But the price of that victory was lying motionless in her arms. The darkest descent wasn't about the criminals or the explosives or the threats to her life. It was about losing the one soul who had loved her unconditionally, who had risked everything for her, who had somehow learned to speak just so he could tell her he loved her. As tactical teams secured the building and medical personnel rushed toward them, Emma held her puppy close and whispered the words she should have said more often. I love you too, Courage. I love you too. Outside, dawn was beginning to break over the city. The longest night of Emma's life was finally ending. But she would have traded 1,000 sunrises to see Courage open his eyes just one more time. The rescue was complete. The devastation was absolute. And somewhere in the space between salvation and loss, a 7-year-old girl was learning that sometimes the greatest acts of love require the ultimate sacrifice. Dr. Sarah Kim had been a veterinary emergency specialist for 12 years, but she'd never been summoned to an FBI crime scene at dawn to treat a puppy who'd allegedly helped capture a human trafficking ring. As she knelt beside Emma in the factory's main floor, her experienced hands moving over Courage's small body, she tried to process what Agent Santos had just told her. The tranquilizer dart contained a combination of ketamine and xylazine designed for animals weighing at least 40 pounds. Dr. Kim explained to Emma, her voice gentle but professional. This puppy weighs maybe 8 pounds. The dosage should have killed him instantly. Emma's tears had stopped falling, but only because she had no more left to shed. Should have. His heart is still beating. Barely. His breathing is extremely shallow, but it's there. Dr. Kim's hands moved to a small medical kit she'd brought. The fact that he survived this long suggests an extraordinary will to live. But Emma, I need you to understand something. Emma looked up from Courage's motionless form. What? Even if I can counteract the tranquilizer, the damage to his nervous system may be permanent. He might survive but never be the same dog you knew. No more barking, no more playing, possibly no recognition of you or anyone else. Dr. Kim's voice carried the weight of someone who delivered devastating news to pet owners countless times. And the treatment itself is dangerous. The counteragent could stop his heart completely. Agent Santos stepped closer, her own expression troubled. Emma, there's something else you need to know. Emma didn't want to hear anything else. She wanted to focus on Courage, on the impossible choice Dr. Kim was asking her to make. But something in Agent Santos's tone demanded attention. Vincent's organization didn't just have one extraction team en route, the agent continued. Our intelligence indicates they have backup protocols that are already in motion. They're not going to simply abandon a multi-million-dollar operation because we captured one man. What does that mean? Emma asked, though part of her already knew the answer would be terrible. It means that even with Vincent in custody, you're still in danger. His organization will regroup and try again, probably within days. The only way to ensure your safety is to place you in federal protective custody immediately. Emma's world tilted sideways. For how long? Agent Santos exchanged a glance with Dr. Kim before answering. Possibly indefinitely, until we can dismantle the entire network and eliminate the threat to your life. What about Rose? What about my grandmother? Mrs. Hayes, Rose, will be relocated as well, but to a different facility. For security reasons, you won't be able to see her or communicate with her until the operation is complete. The words hit Emma like physical blows. She was going to lose Rose, the only family she'd ever known. She was going to lose her home, her neighborhood, her school, everything familiar and safe. And now Dr. Kim was telling her she might lose Courage too, either to death or to permanent brain damage that would erase everything that made him the dog she loved. I don't understand, Emma whispered. We stopped them. Vincent is in jail. Why can't things just go back to normal? Agent Santos knelt down to Emma's eye level, her expression filled with genuine compassion. Because normal was never real, sweetheart. The life Rose created for you was beautiful, but it was built on hiding from the truth. Now that Vincent's organization knows who you are and where you've been, that hiding place is gone forever. Dr. Kim cleared her throat gently. Emma, I need an answer about Courage. Every minute we delay reduces his chances of survival. Do you want me to try the counteragent, knowing it might kill him? Or, do you want to let nature take its course? Emma stared down at Courage's small, still form. His chest rose and fell so slightly she had to watch carefully to see the movement. This was the dog who had tracked her across the city, organized a pack of street dogs, navigated a hostile building in complete darkness, and somehow learned to speak just to tell her he loved her. But Dr. Kim was asking her to choose between losing him to death or losing him to brain damage. Either way, the Courage she knew, intelligent, brave, loving, might be gone forever. There's another factor to consider, Agent Santos said softly. If Courage survives but is permanently disabled, he won't be able to accompany you into protective custody. Federal safe houses don't allow pets, especially not pets that require extensive medical care. The impossible choice became even more impossible. Emma could try to save Courage's life, knowing it might destroy his mind and guarantee their separation. Or she could let him die peacefully in her arms, preserving their love but ending their story forever. Why? Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. Why does everything have to be so hard? Why can't I just keep the people I love? Dr. Kim's expression softened. Sometimes life asks us to make choices that feel impossible because they are impossible. There's no right answer, only the answer we can live with. Emma closed her eyes and tried to think about what Courage would want. He'd risked everything to save her, not because he expected anything in return, but because that's what love looked like. If he could speak now, what would he tell her to do? The answer came to her with painful clarity. Courage would want her to be safe. He would want her to accept protection, even if it meant leaving him behind. He would want her to live, even if he couldn't be part of that life. But Emma also knew something else. She couldn't make this choice alone. Not this choice. Not about him. Can I talk to him? Emma asked suddenly. Dr. Kim looked confused. Emma, he's unconscious. He can't hear you. You don't know that. Emma said with quiet conviction. He was unconscious before, and he still managed to communicate with me. He still managed to save everyone. Agent Santos started to speak, but Dr. Kim held up a hand to stop her. Go ahead, Emma. Talk to him. Emma leaned down until her face was inches from Courage's small head. Hey boy, she whispered. I need your help one more time. I have to make a choice, and I don't know what to do. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, so faintly that only Emma could hear it, came a sound that might have been breathing but sounded almost like speech. Emma. Dr. Kim's eyes widened. That's not possible. The tranquilizer should have completely suppressed conscious brain function. But Emma heard it clearly. I'm here, Courage. I'm right here. Choose safety. The words came so softly that Emma had to strain to hear them, but they were unmistakably there. Choose life. I don't want to leave you. Not leaving. Love forever. Emma's tears started flowing again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of understanding. Courage wasn't just telling her to choose safety over staying with him. He was telling her that their love didn't depend on physical presence. He was telling her that some bonds transcend distance, time, even death. Try the counteragent, Emma said to Dr. Kim, her voice steady despite her tears. Emma, you understand the risks. Try the counteragent, Emma repeated. But not because I want to keep him with me. Because he deserves a chance to choose for himself whether he wants to keep fighting. Dr. Kim nodded with respect. That's very mature of you. As the veterinarian prepared the injection, Agent Santos spoke quietly. Emma, there's something else. Your father, David Chun, he left more than just hidden bank accounts. He left instructions. Emma looked up from Courage. What kind of instructions? If anything ever happened to you, if his security protocols were ever activated, he wanted you to know something. Agent Santos pulled out a sealed envelope that looked like it had been waiting years to be opened. He left this letter specifically for this situation. Emma stared at the envelope. Another revelation, another piece of her identity that had been hidden from her. How many more secrets were there? How many more times would she discover that everything she thought she knew was wrong? Can I read it after? Emma gestured toward Courage. Of course. Dr. Kim was ready with the injection. This will either counteract the tranquilizer or stop his heart within 30 seconds. Are you sure? Emma placed her hand gently on Courage's small chest, feeling the faint rhythm of his heartbeat. He taught me that sometimes the biggest act of love is taking a risk for someone else. I'm going to take this risk for him. Dr. Kim administered the injection with professional precision. Then everyone in the abandoned factory, FBI agents, tactical team members, medical personnel, held their breath and waited. For 15 seconds, nothing changed. Courage remained motionless, his breathing shallow, his body limp. At 20 seconds, Emma's heart started to sink. At 25 seconds, she began to wonder if she'd made the wrong choice. At 30 seconds exactly, Courage's eyes opened. Not the confused, unfocused gaze of a brain-damaged animal, but the same intelligent, loving expression Emma had seen every morning for 3 weeks. His dark eyes found hers immediately, and his small tail managed a weak but unmistakable wag. Courage! Emma's cry of joy echoed through the factory, and she saw several hardened FBI agents wipe their eyes. But Courage's recovery was just the beginning of Emma's impossible choice. As Dr. Kim conducted a quick neurological assessment and confirmed that the puppy had retained all his cognitive functions, Agent Santos returned to the painful subject of protective custody. Emma, I'm sorry, but we really do need to move quickly. Every minute you're exposed increases the risk. Emma looked around the factory, at the FBI agents who had risked their lives to save her, at Dr. Kim who had given Courage back his life, at the tactical team members who were already scanning for new threats. All of these people were trying to protect her, but their protection came at a cost she wasn't sure she could pay. What if I refuse? Emma asked quietly. Agent Santos blinked in surprise. I'm sorry. What if I refuse protective custody? What if I choose to go home with Rose and take my chances? Emma, you're 7 years old. You can't make that kind of decision. I can't make any decisions, apparently, Emma replied with a bitterness that surprised everyone present. I can't choose my name, my identity, my family, or my future. But I can choose whether to run and hide or stay and fight. Agent Santos looked uncomfortable. It's not about fighting, Emma. It's about survival. Courage chose to fight instead of run, Emma said, her voice growing stronger. Rose chose to fight for me instead of giving me up when it would have been safer. Even Officer Martinez chose to fight at the end, even though it cost her life. The mention of Officer Martinez, who had betrayed Emma but died trying to protect her, hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the factory knew that courage came in many forms, and running wasn't always the answer. But before anyone could respond, Dr. Kim's radio crackled with an incoming message that changed everything. Dr. Kim, this is dispatch. We've got reports of suspicious activity at 412 Maple Street. Multiple units en route, but they're requesting your presence for possible animal casualties. Emma's blood turned to ice. That's Rose's address. That's our house. Agent Santos was already speaking into her radio. All units to 412 Maple Street immediately. Possible hostile action against protected witness family. But Emma was no longer listening to the tactical communications. She was looking at Courage, who had struggled to his feet despite his weakness, and was staring toward the factory's exit with the same focused intensity he'd shown when tracking her across the city. He knows, Emma said softly. Knows what? Dr. Kim asked. He knows Rose is in danger. And he knows we have to choose between my safety and hers. Agent Santos's radio crackled again. Dispatch to Agent Santos. Multiple explosions reported at target address. Structure fire confirmed. EMT en route. The impossible choice was complete now. Emma could accept protective custody and live safely while Rose faced Vincent's organization alone. Or she could refuse protection and return to help Rose, knowing that doing so would put everyone who tried to protect them in mortal danger. But as Emma stared into Courage's intelligent eyes, she realized there was a third option. One that no adult would approve of, one that carried risks beyond imagination, but one that honored everything she'd learned about love and sacrifice over the past 18 hours. Agent Santos, Emma said, her voice carrying a determination that made the hardened federal agent take notice. I want to make a deal. Emma, you're a child. You can't negotiate with federal law enforcement. I'm David Chen's daughter, Emma replied, and for the first time since learning her true identity, she spoke those words with pride rather than confusion. And according to you, I'm the key to millions of dollars that my father hid. That makes me valuable enough to negotiate. Agent Santos stared at her for a long moment. What kind of deal? Emma took a deep breath and made the choice that would define the rest of her life. I'll cooperate with accessing my father's accounts. I'll help you use his money to fund the investigation and destroy this organization completely. But I do it from home, with Rose, with Courage, and with the neighborhood that's already proven they'll fight to protect me. Emma, that's suicide. They'll never stop coming for you. Then we make sure they can't come, Emma said with quiet conviction. We use my father's resources to turn our neighborhood into the safest place in the city. We hire security, we train the residents, we create a community that's too strong and too well protected for any criminal organization to threaten. Dr. Kim was staring at Emma with amazement. That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the most foolish. Maybe both, Emma admitted. But Courage taught me that sometimes the most important choice isn't between safety and danger. It's between living in fear and living with love. Agent Santos was quiet for a long moment, clearly calculating odds and possibilities. Finally, she spoke. I'd have to clear it with my superiors. And there would be conditions. Serious conditions. I'll accept any conditions that let me stay with my family. Your family? Emma looked down at Courage, who was watching the conversation with that same intelligence that had amazed her from the beginning. Then she thought about Rose, probably fighting for her life at this very moment. Rose chose to love me when she didn't have to. Courage chose to save me when it meant risking his life. That makes them my family, no matter what blood tests or legal documents say. As if responding to her words, Courage made a soft sound that everyone in the factory heard clearly. Family. Dr. Kim shook her head in wonder. I've been a veterinarian for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Neither have I, Agent Santos admitted. But Emma, if we're going to try this, we need to move immediately. Every second we delay gives Vincent's people more time to hurt Rose. Emma nodded and carefully lifted Courage into her arms. The puppy was still weak from his ordeal, but his eyes were bright and focused. Are you ready for one more rescue, boy? Courage's response was unmistakable. Ready. As the FBI tactical team prepared to move out, Emma realized that the impossible choice hadn't been impossible after all. She'd found a fourth option that no one else had considered. Not because she was smarter than the adults around her, but because she'd learned something they'd forgotten. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't weapons or money or government protection. Sometimes it's a 7-year-old girl, an extraordinary puppy, and a community of people who refuse to let evil win. The darkest descent was over. Now it was time to prove that love could be just as organized, just as determined, and just as devastating as any criminal enterprise. But first they had to save Rose. The scene at 412, Maple Street, was a war zone. As Agent Santos's convoy rounded the corner onto Emma's street, the first thing they saw was smoke billowing from 3 different houses. Not just Rose's house, but Mrs. Chen's flower shop and the Johnsons' home 2 doors down. Vincent's organization hadn't come for Rose alone. They'd come to send a message to the entire neighborhood about what happened to people who interfered with their operations. But the second thing they saw defied every expectation about how communities respond to coordinated attacks. The street was full of people, but they weren't running in panic. Instead, they were moving with the organized efficiency of a trained disaster response team. Mrs. Peterson was directing traffic flow to keep emergency vehicles access clear. Tony from the gas station was manning a coordination station with multiple cell phones, apparently in contact with various emergency services. Mr. Johnson was leading a bucket brigade to contain the spread of fire damage. And in the center of it all, Rose Hayes stood in her front yard directing operations with the calm authority of someone who'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. That's impossible, Agent Santos muttered, staring at the scene through the convoy's reinforced windows. Civilian populations don't respond to coordinated attacks with organized defense. They panic. They scatter. Emma pressed her face to the window, her heart swelling with pride and amazement. You don't understand. This isn't just a civilian population. This is our neighborhood. But even as she spoke, Emma noticed something that made her blood run cold. The smoke wasn't coming from random destruction. It was creating a pattern. The 3 damaged buildings formed a triangle around Rose's house, and the smoke was thick enough to obscure sight lines from certain angles. Agent Santos, Emma said urgently, this isn't just an attack. It's cover for something else. The federal agent followed Emma's gaze and immediately understood. They're using the chaos and smoke to mask an extraction operation. While everyone's focused on the fires, they're moving in on Rose. Agent Santos spoke rapidly into her radio. All units, be advised that fires are tactical cover. Primary target is Rose Hayes at center of triangle. Unknown number of hostiles using smoke for concealment. That's when Emma saw him. A figure in tactical gear moving through Mrs. Chen's garden with professional stealth, heading directly toward Rose's back door. Then another figure, approaching from the opposite direction. Then a third, coming from the street. There! Emma pointed toward the figures. They're surrounding the house. But Agent Santos wasn't looking at the tactical team members anymore. She was staring at something else entirely, something that made her face go pale. Emma, she said slowly, look at your grandmother. Emma focused on Rose, who was still directing the neighborhood's response to the emergency. But now that she was really watching, Emma noticed something extraordinary. Rose wasn't just organizing people randomly. She was positioning them with strategic precision. Mrs. Peterson wasn't just directing traffic. She was creating clear lines of sight and fields of fire. Tony wasn't just coordinating emergency services. He was managing communications that sounded distinctly tactical. The entire neighborhood response wasn't just organized. It was military-grade coordinated. How is this possible? Agent Santos whispered. That's when Emma's radio, the one Dr. Kim had given her to stay in communication, crackled with Rose's voice. But Rose wasn't speaking to Emma. She was speaking to someone else entirely, using language that made Emma's world tilt sideways. David, this is Rose. Package is secure, but we've got at least 3 hostiles moving on our position. Request immediate authorization for defensive protocols. Emma's breath caught in her throat. David. Rose was talking to David. The response came back immediately, in a voice that was warm, familiar, and absolutely impossible. Authorization granted, Rose. Emma's convoy is 30 seconds out. Hold position until extraction team has visual confirmation of our daughter's safety. Emma's mind reeled as the pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The voice on the radio was her father, David Chun, the man who was supposed to be dead, who had supposedly disappeared years ago, who had allegedly left behind only hidden bank accounts and security protocols. He was alive. He was here. And he'd been coordinating the neighborhood's defenses all along. Agent Santos, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think we've been played. The federal agent was staring at her radio equipment, which was picking up the same communications Emma was hearing. That's not possible. David Chun disappeared 7 years ago. Our intelligence indicates. Your intelligence was wrong, came David Chen's voice over the radio, apparently addressing their conversation directly. Agent Santos, this is David Chen. I've been monitoring your communications since you left the factory. Please bring my daughter to the safe house immediately. Agent Santos responded into her radio with professional caution. Mr. Chen, if you're alive, we're going to need verification of identity and an explanation of how you've managed to evade federal detection for 7 years. The explanation is simple, David's voice replied. I never left. I've been here the entire time, protecting my daughter and building the infrastructure necessary to keep her safe when Vincent's organization inevitably found her. Emma's mind was spinning as she tried to process what she was hearing. Rose knew? This whole time, Rose knew you were alive. Rose is my wife, David's voice said gently. She's been your stepmother for 7 years, Emma. She took you in not as a housekeeper caring for her employer's child, but as a mother protecting her daughter. The revelation hit Emma like a tsunami. Everything she'd learned about her identity in the past 18 hours had been based on Vincent's version of events, a version that was apparently as false as everything else he'd told her. But before she could process the full implications, the tactical situation escalated dramatically. The 3 figures surrounding Rose's house had reached their positions and were preparing to breach simultaneously. But what they found waiting for them defied every assumption about suburban neighborhoods and civilian defenses. The Bucket Brigade turned out to be composed entirely of military veterans who had moved to the neighborhood over the past 7 years. The traffic coordination team was managing not just emergency vehicles, but unmarked security units that had been stationed throughout the area. The communication hub that Tony was operating was connected to a surveillance network that covered every approach to the street. Emma watched in amazement as her neighborhood revealed itself to be something completely different from what she'd always believed. Not just a community, but a fortress. Not just neighbors, but a dedicated protection detail that had been preparing for this day for years. Vincent's tactical team found themselves facing not helpless civilians, but coordinated resistance from people who had been training for exactly this scenario. The first hostile was taken down by Mr. Johnson, who turned out to be a former Navy SEAL, using techniques that suggested extensive recent practice. The second was captured by a team led by Mrs. Peterson, whose traffic coordination had actually been directing the movements of undercover security personnel. The third made it to Rose's back door, only to find Rose herself waiting with equipment that definitely wasn't standard household items. Hostile down. Rose's voice came over the radio with calm professionalism. Area secure. Ready for package extraction. Emma stared at the scene unfolding outside the convoy windows. Her entire life, everything she'd thought she knew about her family, her neighborhood, her identity, all of it had been carefully constructed theater designed to give her a normal childhood while keeping her safe from threats she'd never even known existed. Emma, Agent Santos said softly, I think we need to have a very different conversation about protective custody. But Emma was no longer listening to Agent Santos. She was listening to Courage, who had been quiet during the radio exchanges, but was now making sounds that had evolved beyond simple speech into something that resembled actual conversation. Emma, Courage said with clarity that made everyone in the convoy stare. Time to meet your father. Dr. Kim's voice was barely audible. That's not medically possible. Dogs don't develop human speech patterns. Courage turned to look at her with patient intelligence. Not dog, he said clearly. Guardian. The final revelation hit Emma like lightning. Courage wasn't just an extraordinary puppy she'd rescued from the street. He was part of her father's protection system, trained to appear as a normal pet while actually serving as her personal security detail. How long? Emma asked, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to Courage or her father or the universe in general. Since birth, Courage replied. Always protected. Always loved. Emma looked around at the neighborhood that was revealing itself to be an elaborate security operation, at the puppy who was actually a highly trained guardian, at the community that had spent 7 years preparing to protect her, and felt something she'd never experienced before. Not confusion or betrayal or fear, but absolute, overwhelming safety. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He'd built an entire world around keeping her safe, while still giving her a childhood filled with love and normalcy. Rose hadn't been lying to her about their family. She'd been protecting the truth until Emma was old enough to understand it. Courage hadn't been a random rescue. He'd been her assigned protector who had somehow learned to love her as genuinely as any pet. And the neighborhood she'd grown up in wasn't just a place where people happened to care about each other. It was a community that had been specifically created to be unbreachable, staffed with people who had dedicated their lives to ensuring that David Chen's daughter could grow up safe and happy. Agent Santos, Emma said, her voice filled with wonder rather than anger. I don't think I need protective custody after all. Emma, even with all of this security, Vincent's organization is finished, came David's voice over the radio. Emma, sweetheart, Vincent Kozlov was the last piece of a puzzle I've been solving for 7 years. With him in custody and his extraction teams neutralized, the threat to your safety is eliminated. Agent Santos was staring at her radio equipment in amazement. Mr. Chen, how did you manage to identify and track every member of an international criminal organization? Simple, David replied. I created it. The convoy went completely silent. I'm sorry, Agent Santos said slowly. Did you say you created Vincent's organization? 7 years ago, when I realized that my business activities had made my daughter a target, I had 2 choices. I could run and hide, constantly looking over our shoulders for the rest of our lives. Or I could take control of the threat by creating a controlled environment where every enemy was actually working for me. Emma felt like the world was spinning around her. Vincent was working for you. Vincent thought he was working for himself, but his organization was funded, staffed, and directed by my people from the beginning. Every criminal operation they conducted was actually designed to identify and eliminate real threats to your safety. Every kidnapping they planned was a training exercise to test our defenses. But Vincent tried to kill me. He had explosives. Vincent believed he was conducting a real operation because that was the only way to ensure our security systems would be tested under genuine stress. But the explosives were fake, his extraction teams were my people, and every moment of danger you experienced was being monitored and controlled by teams whose only job was protecting you. Emma's mind reeled as she understood what her father was telling her. The most terrifying night of her life had actually been the safest night of her life, because everyone involved, except Vincent himself, had been working to protect her. What about Officer Martinez? She died. Officer Martinez volunteered for deep cover assignment knowing the risks. Her death was staged using techniques that would fool Vincent but allow our medical team to extract her safely. She's currently recovering in a secure medical facility. Emma felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Even the betrayal that had hurt her most hadn't been real. But one question remained. Why? Why go through all of this instead of just telling me the truth? David's voice carried infinite love and regret. Because you deserved a childhood, Emma. You deserved to grow up feeling loved and safe and normal, not knowing that you were valuable enough for people to kill for. I wanted to give you 7 years of being just a little girl with a grandmother who adored her and a puppy who made her laugh. And now you're old enough to understand that love comes in many forms. Sometimes it looks like bedtime stories and homemade cookies. Sometimes it looks like a community of people who dedicate their lives to keeping you safe. And sometimes it looks like a father who loves you enough to disappear from your life so you can have the childhood he never could. Emma looked around at the neighborhood that was no longer hiding its true nature, at Courage who was no longer pretending to be just a pet, at the life that was revealing itself to be both more complicated and more loving than she'd ever imagined. "Can I see you now?" she asked softly. "Emma," David's voice carried a smile she could hear. "Look to your left." Emma turned toward the passenger window of the convoy vehicle, and there, standing on the sidewalk beside Rose's house, was a man who looked exactly like the father she'd imagined but never known. Tall, kind-eyed, wearing clothes that suggested he'd been working in the garden rather than coordinating elaborate security operations. He looked completely ordinary and completely extraordinary at the same time. "He's been there the whole time," Agent Santos realized. "Living in the neighborhood, watching you grow up." "Tony from the gas station," Emma breathed, understanding hitting her like lightning. "Tony is my father." David, Tony, raised his hand in a small wave, and Emma could see tears streaming down his face. "I've been wanting to do that for 7 years, his voice came through the radio. "Wave at my daughter and know she was waving back at me, not at a stranger who sold her grandmother gas every week." Emma was out of the convoy vehicle before anyone could stop her, running across the street toward the man who had been part of her life every day without her knowing it. Courage was somehow keeping pace with her despite his recent medical crisis, moving with renewed energy that suggested his recovery was even more remarkable than Dr. Kim had hoped. When Emma reached her father, she discovered that 7 years of imagining this moment hadn't prepared her for the reality of it. He was exactly the right height for her to bury her face against his chest. His arms were exactly strong enough to make her feel completely safe. His voice, when he whispered, "I love you, Emma," directly into her ear, was exactly warm enough to heal every moment of fear and confusion she'd experienced in the past day. And when Courage sat down beside them and said, clearly enough for everyone to hear, "Family complete," Emma understood that some stories don't end with rescues or revelations. They end with coming home. But this homecoming was different from anything Emma had imagined, because home had revealed itself to be not just a house or a neighborhood, but an entire world that had been created around the simple principle that love was worth any amount of effort, any level of complexity, any degree of sacrifice. As she stood in her father's arms, surrounded by the community that had protected her without her knowledge, Emma realized that the greatest act of kindness wasn't rescuing a puppy from the side of the road. It was a father who had loved his daughter enough to build an entire universe around keeping her safe while still letting her be a child. And a puppy who had loved her enough to reveal his true nature when she needed him most. And a community of people who had chosen to make protecting one little girl's happiness their life's work. The climactic revelation wasn't just about identities and organizations and elaborate deceptions. It was about discovering that love could be organized, strategic, and absolutely overwhelming in its power to transform the world. Emma Hayes, Emma Chen, was finally home. Not just in the place where she'd always lived, but in the truth of how much she was loved. And that truth was extraordinary enough to change everything. 3 months later, Emma Chen was walking home from school along the same route she'd taken every day for 3 years. But everything was different now. She still passed Murphy's Hardware and the old laundromat, still turned the corner at the spot where she'd first found Courage muddy and afraid. But now she knew that Mr. Murphy wasn't just a friendly store owner. He was former military intelligence who'd been monitoring the neighborhood's security systems. The laundromat wasn't just a place where people washed clothes. It was a communication hub that kept the entire protection network connected. And the alley where Vincent had grabbed her 3 months ago was now home to a small memorial garden that the neighborhood had planted together. Not a memorial for something terrible that had happened, but a celebration of something beautiful that had emerged from darkness. "Emma," Mrs. Chen called from her flower shop, which had been rebuilt after the tactical fires and now doubled as the neighborhood's official community center. "Your father's looking for you." Emma smiled and waved, but she wasn't hurried anymore. The constant low-level anxiety that had colored her childhood, the feeling that she needed to get home quickly, needed to check on Rose, needed to make sure everything was still safe, had been replaced by something much more peaceful. Not just safety, but certainty. The kind of bone-deep security that came from knowing that an entire community of people had made her well-being their priority. As she walked, Courage trotted beside her with the easy confidence of a dog who no longer needed to hide his extraordinary intelligence. Over the past 3 months, he'd gradually revealed more of his true nature, though he'd never lost the playful affection that had made Emma fall in love with him in the first place. Now he served as something unprecedented. A therapy dog who could actually hold conversations with the children he helped. "Emma," Courage said in his now familiar voice, drawing stares from passing neighbors who still marveled at hearing a dog speak clearly. There's something we need to discuss. What's that? Your father wants to tell you about the foundation. Emma's steps slowed. Over the past 3 months, she'd learned about many aspects of her father's work that had been hidden from her. The security company he'd built. The network of safe neighborhoods he'd created in 12 different cities. The rehabilitation programs for children who had been rescued from trafficking operations. But the foundation was something new. What foundation? The one he's creating in your honor. The Emma Chin Foundation for Lost Children. Courage's voice carried pride and something else, anticipation. He wants to know if you'd be interested in being more than just the namesake. Emma felt her heart skip. What do you mean? He means, came her father's voice from behind her, that you're old enough to start making choices about how we use the resources we've recovered to help other children. Emma turned to see David walking toward them from Tony's gas station, which still served as his cover identity even though the neighborhood now knew the truth. He was carrying a folder that looked official and important, but his expression was warm with the kind of paternal pride that Emma was still getting used to experiencing directly. What kind of choices? Emma asked. Well, David said, falling into step beside her as they continued toward home. We've identified 47 children around the world who are in situations similar to what yours could have been. Children whose biological families have made them targets for criminals, but who deserve the chance to grow up safely and normally. Emma's mind immediately went to those children. Kids her age or younger, living in fear, not knowing if the adults around them were protecting or threatening them. What can we do for them? We can give them what I gave you. New identities, protective communities, families who choose to love them regardless of biological connection. David's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who had found a way to turn personal trauma into universal healing. But it's not just about moving them and hiding them. It's about creating sustainable communities where they can thrive. As they walked, Emma noticed something that had become commonplace over the past 3 months, but still amazed her. The neighborhood was bustling with activity that looked normal on the surface, but carried deeper purpose. Mrs. Peterson was organizing what appeared to be a block party, but was actually a training exercise for civilian emergency response. Mr. Johnson was teaching neighborhood kids how to play soccer, while simultaneously instructing them in basic situational awareness. Rose was tending her garden while monitoring security cameras disguised as decorative yard fixtures. It's like what you built here, Emma realized. But for other children. Exactly. And Emma, you have insights into this process that no adult could have. You understand what it feels like to live in a protective environment without knowing it's protective. You know what children need to feel normal and loved while being kept safe. Emma considered this as they turned onto their street. The house that had always been home looked exactly the same from the outside, but inside, she now knew, it contained communication equipment that could coordinate emergency response across multiple time zones and security systems that could detect threats from miles away. More importantly, it contained a family that had been carefully constructed but had become genuinely, deeply loving. There's something else, David continued. The Foundation wants to establish a training program for animals like Courage. Dogs and other animals who can serve as both genuine companions and sophisticated protection systems for vulnerable children. Emma looked down at Courage, who was watching the conversation with that same intelligent focus she'd learned to recognize as his listening and evaluating expression. How many children could we help? Emma asked. Hundreds if we do it right. Maybe thousands over time. David's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much suffering, but also the hope of someone who believed it could be changed. But Emma, this would mean that your life changes too. You'd be involved in work that's sometimes dangerous, always complex, and requires absolute commitment to protecting children who can't protect themselves. Emma thought about this as they reached their front yard, where Rose was waiting on the porch with the kind of smile that had greeted Emma every day for 7 years, but now carried the additional warmth of complete honesty. Rose, Emma called, did you know about the foundation? I helped design it, Rose replied, and Emma could hear decades of experience working with vulnerable children in her voice. Your father and I have been planning it since the day we brought you home. We always hoped that someday you'd be old enough and safe enough to help other children find what you found. Emma sat down on the porch steps, and Courage settled beside her with his head on her lap. The same position they'd been in that morning 3 months ago when she'd promised him she'd be back after school. But everything had changed since then, including Emma herself. What would it mean exactly? Being involved in the foundation. David sat down on her other side, and Rose joined them on the step below, creating the kind of family circle that Emma had dreamed about but never expected to experience. It would mean traveling sometimes to help establish new protective communities, David explained. It would mean working with children who are scared and confused, helping them understand that they're safe without overwhelming them with information they're not ready to handle. It would mean being part of something much larger than just our family or our neighborhood. And, Rose added gently, it would mean giving up some of the normal childhood experiences you've earned the right to have. No more pretending that the world is simple and safe. No more believing that bad things only happen to other people. Emma understood what they were offering her. The chance to turn her own traumatic experience into a force for protecting other children, but at the cost of the innocence she'd only recently learned had been carefully preserved for her. Can I think about it? Emma asked. Of course, David said. Take all the time you need. But Courage had been listening to the entire conversation with growing excitement, and he had opinions of his own. Emma, he said, his voice carrying the wisdom of an adult and the enthusiasm of a puppy simultaneously. Remember what you told me the night we met? Emma smiled, remembering. I told you that sometimes the scariest things turn out to be the most important things. And what did I tell you when the FBI agents thought I was going to die? Emma's voice grew soft with memory. You told me that love doesn't end just because circumstances change. The children who need our help, Courage continued. They're just like I was that night. Scared, alone, not sure who they can trust. But if we help them, they'll find what I found. What's that? Family. Purpose. The chance to become who they're meant to be instead of just surviving who they have to be. Emma looked around at the neighborhood that had revealed itself to be so much more than a neighborhood, at the family that had been built from choice rather than blood, but had become deeper than most biological families ever achieved. At the life that had been constructed to appear normal, but was actually extraordinary in its dedication to love and protection. I have one condition, Emma said finally. David raised an eyebrow. What's that? We don't lie to the children we help. Not like you lied to me. Emma's voice carried no anger, but it held firm conviction. I understand why you did it, and I'm grateful for the childhood you gave me. But these children deserve to know the truth about their situations in age-appropriate ways. Rose and David exchanged a look that spoke of years of partnership and shared decision-making. You're right, David said simply. We learned a lot from raising you, and one of the things we learned is that children are stronger and more capable of handling difficult truths than adults usually give them credit for. And we learned, Rose added, that the goal isn't to protect children from the world forever. It's to protect them long enough for them to develop the strength to engage with the world as it really is. Emma felt something settle in her chest. Not just peace, but purpose. The same feeling she'd had when she'd first seen Courage shivering and afraid on the corner, when every instinct had told her to help him regardless of the cost or complications. Then yes, she said. I want to help. I want to be part of the foundation. Courage's tail began wagging with such enthusiasm that it created a small dust cloud on the porch. Partnership continues, he said with satisfaction. But I have another condition, Emma continued. Another one? David's voice carried amused affection. We start here, in this neighborhood, with the other children who live on our street. Emma gestured toward the houses around them, where she now knew several families were dealing with their own versions of complicated security situations. Mrs. Peterson's granddaughter, who visits every summer and always seems scared. The new family that moved in last month who never let their kids play outside. We help them first, before we try to help children on the other side of the world. Rose's smile grew even wider. Now you sound like your father's daughter. She's been my daughter since the day I met her, David said quietly. Biology doesn't create family. Choice creates family. And Emma, you're choosing to extend our family to include children who need what we can offer. As the sun began to set over their street, Emma realized that this moment was both an ending and a beginning. The story of the scared little girl who'd been kidnapped and rescued was over. The story of Emma Chun, child advocate and co-founder of a foundation dedicated to protecting vulnerable children, was just beginning. But there was one more revelation waiting, one that would change how Emma understood not just her own story, but the nature of kindness itself. Emma, Courage said softly, there's something I never told you about the night you found me. Emma looked down at him with curiosity. What's that? I wasn't lost. I wasn't abandoned. Courage's voice carried the weight of truth that had been carefully held for the right moment. I was placed on that corner, at that exact time, because your father knew you would be walking that route and knew you would respond to a creature in need. Emma's breath caught. You mean? I mean that the act of kindness you thought you were performing, rescuing me, was actually the final component of your father's protection system. He needed you to bond with a guardian who could protect you without arousing suspicion. But he also needed you to do it through choice, through love, through your own instincts about helping someone who needed help. Emma stared at Courage, then at her father, then back at Courage. So saving you was. Saving you was saving yourself, Courage said gently. But that doesn't make it less real. The love between us, the bond we formed, the way we protected each other, all of that happened because you chose kindness when kindness was difficult. Your father created the opportunity, but you created the relationship. David's voice was soft with emotion. I could arrange for you to find Courage, but I couldn't arrange for you to love him. I could train him to protect you, but I couldn't train either of you to become family. That happened because of who you are, Emma. Because when you see someone who needs help, your first instinct is to provide it. Emma felt tears starting in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or betrayal. They were tears of understanding. The circle was complete now. The act of kindness that had started everything had been both genuine and orchestrated, both spontaneous and planned, both simple and infinitely complex. And that, Rose said, settling back against the porch railing, is why we know you'll be extraordinary at helping other children. Because even when you thought you were just helping a lost puppy, you were actually choosing to save the world. One small act of love at a time. As the first stars began appearing in the evening sky, Emma Chin sat surrounded by the family she'd chosen and who had chosen her, in the neighborhood that had been built around protecting her, with the dog who had been placed in her path but had become genuinely, deeply hers through the simple power of mutual kindness. Tomorrow, she would begin the work of helping other children find what she had found. She would travel to places where children were scared and alone, and she would help create communities where they could be safe and loved. She would work with animals who could serve as both companions and protectors, teaching them to love the children they guarded as genuinely as Courage had learned to love her. But tonight, she was simply Emma, sitting on her porch with her family, watching the neighborhood that had saved her prepare for another peaceful evening in a world where love had proven itself stronger than fear, where kindness had organized itself into an unstoppable force, and where a 7-year-old girl's decision to help a scared puppy had rippled outward into a foundation that would protect children around the world. The story had come full circle, but the circle was growing. Soon it would encompass dozens of neighborhoods, hundreds of children, thousands of acts of kindness that would create new circles, new families, new communities built around the radical idea that every child deserved to grow up feeling completely, absolutely, unconditionally loved. Emma Chun had learned that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the largest changes in the world. And sometimes, when you reach out to save someone else, you end up saving yourself in ways you never imagined possible. As Courage settled more comfortably against her, speaking one last time before sleep, tomorrow we save more children. Tonight we enjoy being saved. And in the gathering darkness of a neighborhood that had revealed itself to be a sanctuary, a family that had been chosen rather than inherited, and a love that had been built through kindness rather than circumstance, Emma Chin understood that some stories never really end. They just expand to include more people who need saving, more acts of kindness that need performing, and more proof that love, when it organizes itself properly, can transform the entire world. What did this story teach you about the power of kindness and the true meaning of family? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.